When German Führer Adolf Hitler launches World War II, Cardinal Eugenio Maria Giuseppe Giovanni Pacelli has worked to help Pope Pius XI to navigate the turbulent relationship of Catholicism to the fascists in Italy and Nazis in Germany for more than a decade.
When he is elected Pope as Pius XII, he will have to take the Vatican through a war that on one hand challenges every Christian moral and ethical principle there is, but on the other hand will plunge Europe into an abyss of atrocities based on a Christian history of anti-Semitism, religious chauvinism, and internal strife between the Christian confessions.
Decades later, some people will call him Hitler's Pope and hold him in part responsible for the Axis genocides. But was he really that person? If that was true, he would have gone from opposing Nazism and fascism to supporting it in only a couple of months.
So what happened?
Et Spiritus Sanctus.
I'm Astrid Deinhard.
And I'm Spartacus Olsson, and this is a World War II in Real-Time special miniseries.
In the second episode of The Vatican at War, we are at the cusp of World War II, and the Holy See will immediately be drawn into the diplomacy, or lack of diplomacy, behind the war against humanity that rages as a part of the military war.
For those of you who follow our series, you will know that that aspect of the war is my domain. So it will be up to me to take you on that journey. Indy and Astrid wrapped up their episode with Pius XI dying in February 1939. Elected on March 2nd, Pius XII chooses his name partly in honor of his predecessor. Previously, as you just heard from Astrid, he was Eugenio Pacelli, who you'll remember was the Cardinal Secretary of State under Pope Pius XI. Together, Cardinal and Pope tried to weather the countless crises sweeping the world in the 1930s. Cardinal Pacelli signed the Reichskonkordat with Nazi Germany in July 1933 and played a key role in the explosive condemnation of Nazi ideology in 1937. The encyclical Mit brennender Sorge. His diplomatic credentials and close relationship to his predecessor made it almost inevitable that Pacelli would become Pius. And most of the European powers aren't too displeased that he has. Pius has a reputation for being largely non-political, which suits most quarters in fascist Italy and Nazi Germany. But his work with Pius XI to speak out against authoritarianism also make Britain and France hopeful that he will help defend liberal democracy. The Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Mandatory Palestine, Isaac Herzog, telegrams Pius to offer his sincere blessings and declares his faith that the new pope will continue to stand vocally against the anti-Semitic Nazi ideology. But Pius XII is apparently determined to go his own way. This much was clear even before he became Pope. You may remember that before Pius XI died, he was preparing a speech that would strongly criticize the racism of the Italian fascist state and call for the unity of all races. Pius XI passes before he can hold the speech, and Pacelli orders all copies of it to be destroyed and quickly puts out conciliatory feelers to Italian officials. One copy survives and comes to be preserved in the Vatican archives. There is, however, a red thread uniting the diplomacies of the two popes, hopelessly watching the world move closer and closer to the brink. Just days after Pius' coronation on March 12th, Nazi Germany moves to dismember predominantly Catholic Czechoslovakia. Most of the Slovakian part goes to Slovak nationalists who proclaim the Slovak Republic. The latter offers some cautious optimism in Vatican circles. Sure, the Slovak Republic is a client state of Nazi Germany, but one with Catholic politics and identity at its core. The president, Josef Tiso, is even a priest. The winds of conflict keep on picking up. Soon Germany forces Lithuania to cede the Memel territory, and Italy invades Albania not long after. Pius' first major attempt to stem the tide is a radio message on Easter Monday where he deplores arms building and the violation of international treaties. He also calls for a peace initiative inviting the European powers to a conference to discuss their outstanding issues. It doesn't work. The slide into war continues. news. As it looks likely that the German Nazi Reich will invade Poland any time on August 24th, Pius broadcasts one of his last calls for peace on Vatican radio. The danger is imminent, but there is still time. Nothing is lost by peace, everything is lost by war. Men must seek to understand one another. They must resume negotiations. As we know, it is to no avail. As the Nazis and Soviets invade Poland on September 1st and 17th respectively, Pius' public reaction is largely absent, which will set the trend for his response to the war against humanity. Perhaps the furthest he will ever go is actually on his first encyclical on October 20th, Summi Pontificatus, on the unity of human society. The blood of countless human beings, even non-combatants, raises a piteous dirge over a nation such as our dear Poland, which, for its fidelity to the Church, for its services in the defense of Christian civilization, written in indelible characters in the annals of history, has a right to the generous and brotherly sympathy of the whole world, while it awaits, relying on the powerful intercession of Mary, help of Christians, the hour of her resurrection in harmony with the principles of justice and true peace. So, hope and prayers, and no mention of neither the identity of the perpetrators nor the victims. It's even the only time in the war when he mentions a specific country as victimized. He's applying papal neutrality, a principle that was guaranteed in the Lateran Treaty of 1929 that Indy and Astrid discussed in last episode. Many of his predecessors have largely followed the same path. During the Great War, Pope Benedict XV justified his inaction as a common father who loved all his children equally. In the same way, Pius sees himself evenly in duty to the souls of both German and Polish Catholics. Denouncing Germany by name carries the risk of putting its Catholics in danger or even forcing them to choose between church and nation. Pius' unique challenge is that he must maintain this principle even in the face of mounting evidence of who the Nazis truly are. By late December, reports are reaching the Vatican about the grim realities of Nazi occupation. As part of their broader genocidal policy against the Polish nation and efforts to preempt resistance by mass murders, they are also going after the church. They close and loot Catholic churches, arrest priests and other members of the church en masse. In the first month of occupation alone, the Einsatzgruppen murder at least 714 Catholic priests and 6,376 non-priests for simply being prominent Catholics or working for the church. Throughout the war, 3,000 Polish Catholic priests will die at the hands of the Nazis. Things are scarcely better in the other part of occupied Poland. Soviet authorities are less hellbent on genocide, but believe there is no place for organized religion in a socialist society, and have themselves begun closing churches and arresting the clergy. Here too, priests fall victim to the NKVD mass murders. Throughout the war, Polish clergy and ministers in exile will plead with Pius to do something, anything publicly to alleviate the plight of Catholic Poland. The standard response is that the Pope is leaving the matter to the local bishops, as any explicit papal protest would only endanger the victims more. The Nazi Party has made it clear to Pius that he has very little room to maneuver. Vatican Radio initially broadcast reports on occupation practices in Poland, but the German government quickly signals that this risks a press campaign against the Pope and further restrictions on the Church in Poland. Pius, diplomat by nature and profession, probably sees his silence as pragmatic, but the Poles see it as defeatist. As one Polish bishop will write to the Cardinal Secretary of State in February 1943, I wonder just which bishops have asked the Holy Father to remain silent, and I do not venture to judge whether their advice has been well chosen. According to your eminence, they do so out of fear of aggravating the persecution, but the facts prove that with the Pope being silent, each day sees the persecution becoming crueler. When such crimes which cry out to heaven for vengeance are committed, the inexplicable silence of the supreme head of the Church becomes, for those who do not know its reason, and there are thousands of them, a cause for spiritual downfall. And if Pius won't condemn crimes against Catholics, what will he do when it comes to the primary targets of Nazi genocidal policy? The answer is more of the same. The Holy See learns of the unfolding destruction of Europe's Jews directly from its own clergy. Father Piero Scavizzi, an Italian field hospital chaplain on the Eastern Front, has been sending reports back to the Vatican. At the latest, by early 1942, Pius knows of the Nazi genocide of the Jews. He will allude to it in multiple messages and radio addresses, but never go as far as to condemn it by name. The closest he comes is during his Christmas address, 1942, on the Vatican radio, where he calls on all men to vow to devote themselves to creating a divine society. Humanity owes this vow to those hundreds of thousands who, without any fault of their own, sometimes only by reason of their nationality or race, are marked down for death or gradual extinction. Even when formulated that obtusely, it infuriates the Germans, though. A report from the Reich Security Main Office in January states, he is virtually accusing the German people of injustice towards the Jews and makes himself a mouthpiece of the Jewish war criminals. It also angers the United Nations allies. The ambassadors to the Holy See from Belgium, Britain, Poland, and Brazil all lodged official complaints against his vagueness. But Pius tells an American representative in the Vatican that it was difficult to be any more explicit given the circumstances. If he had been, he would have also had to condemn Soviet crimes by name. And surely the Allied nations don't want that. Pius will again explain his reasoning when addressing a gathering of cardinals in June 1943. Every public allusion should be seriously considered and weighted in the very interest of those who suffer so as not to make their position even more difficult and more intolerable than previously, even though inadvertently and unwillingly. Soon, the protest against this apparent lack of clear moral leadership comes not only from inside the Polish Catholic community, though. The Archbishop of New York is now apparently worried that North American Catholics are starting to feel the same. In 1942, President Roosevelt's personal envoy to Pius tells the popes that Catholics and Protestants alike are asking that he publicly condemn Nazi crimes. Even Vatican officials have lodged their complaints, as the Master of Papal Ceremonies has written to the Vatican Secretary of State. One is sadly shocked by having contacts with populations that remain not only astonished but disgusted by the lack of action on the part of the Holy See. It is said that the Pope is afraid of upsetting rulers and for this reason permits the destruction of humanity. Nevertheless, Pius remains steadfast in public neutrality. The Pope's and the Vatican's practical response is slightly less ambiguous. Almost as soon as hostilities in Europe began, the Vatican set up an information bureau to try to put relatives in contact with prisoners of war, refugees, concentration camp inmates, and so on. Vatican radio broadcast appeals across its airwaves and makes requests for further information. Pius will organize and encourage public schemes like this throughout the war, and as you will soon learn from Astrid and Tim, he's also at the center of a secret German plot to topple Nazism. He also uses papal diplomacy behind the scenes to save the victims of Nazi ideology. Inevitably, his priority are converted Jews. As the Nazis decide Jews based on ancestry, they are equally targets for murder. Pius authorizes and encourages papal representatives across the world to do whatever they can to save these new Catholics. Most famous is the Brazilian Visa Project, which began at the very start of his papacy. At the request of various influential German Catholics, Pius petitioned the Brazilian president, Getúlio Vargas, to authorize 3,000 visas for so-called non-Aryan Catholics. The project is only partly successful. In March 1940, Brazil releases 2,000 visas to Brazilian diplomatic staff to distribute within Germany and 1,000 for the Vatican to distribute itself. But anti-Semitic prejudice and suspicion among the Brazilian officials in Germany leads to a reluctance to circulate the visas. Pius' continued pleas fall on deaf ears. In November 1941, Brazilian authorities inform the Vatican that they are suspending the scheme. These limits on real papal power to influence even ardently Catholic countries is also apparent in the Nazi client state of Slovakia. It enacts its first anti-Semitic laws in September 1941. In the first months of 1942, Slovakia begins deporting its Jews to the Nazi extermination factories. The Cardinal Secretary of State tells the papal nuncio in Bratislava of his deep sorrow for the fate of Slovakia's Jews. The nuncio then tries to influence Slovakia's bishops to speak out against the deportations. He's successful in part. The bishops do issue a declaration on April 26th stating the current measures against the Jews are too severe. But it's an ambiguous text full of anti-Judaic sentiment. The deportations continue. So the Vatican moves to more direct measures, protesting straight to President Tiso and the Slovak ambassador to the Holy See, again in vain. By autumn of 1942, up to 60,000 of Slovakia's approximately 90,000 Jews have been deported and murdered. Powerlessness expressed in Cardinal Secretary of State's exclamation that it is a great misfortune that the president of Slovakia is a priest. Everyone knows that the Holy See cannot bring Hitler to heel, but who will understand that we cannot control a priest? Some relief for the rest of Slovakia's Jews comes in 1943, where the government bows to pressure and halt deportations. How much of this can be attributed to the pressure exerted by the Vatican and how much to the turning tide of the war is unclear. In any case, the Romanian Slovakian Jews are spared for now. This non-public response also means that if the German Nazis should assume full control of Slovakia, any influence will be gone. The Pope's silence also extends to the genocide of Roma and Sinti, the endless acts of reprisal killings, political mass murder, and so on. To not mention the atrocities in the Balkans directed at more or less everyone by someone. Here, his silence leaves room for atrocities partly carried out in the name of the Church, as the Croatian Stasi proceed to convert any force and mass murder the predominantly Christian Orthodox Serbs. A similar story to the Slovakian one will also play out in Hungary later on in the war, and Pius will quite literally be at the center of things once the Italian campaign begins. Events we will get into in our regular episodes as they develop in our timeline. On average, Pope Pius XII follows a hands-off approach in the war against humanity. The criticism he already faces for his public silence will only mount in the years after the war. It will start with Soviet post-war propaganda, but eventually also spread to the West. In 1963, the German-language play The Deputy would create a hugely influential image of the Pope as a man indifferent to the Holocaust. He will always have his defenders, but books later in the century will further cement his popular image of Hitler's Pope, whose power politics and anti-Semitism make him complicit in Nazi crimes. But when you strip away the rhetoric, you realize that the truth is more boring and perhaps even more depressing. A man who thought he was doing the best he could, but who failed to do the one thing everyone appeared to want from him, provide some moral light in one of the darkest places and times in history. In the following two episodes, Astrid and our guest Timothy Peach will dive into what Pope Pius XII actually did to help the cause of fighting fascism and Nazism. Espionage. It's a fascinating story, so stay tuned for that. It is the Time Goes to Army that enables us to not stay silent and continue to speak up for the values of human rights and democracy by shining a light on our past failures and successes. Join the Time Goes to Army at patreon.com or timegoes.tv. Never forget.